The arrivals hall at Brookhaven International reeked of overpriced espresso and the kind of desperation that clung to travelers like cheap cologne. Jason Hargrove didn't notice either. His world was measured in profit margins and power plays, not the messy emotions of ordinary people. His assistant scurried behind him, wheeling two identical black suitcases across the polished marble. Jason reached for the nearest one without looking. "Excuse me." The voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "Sure." Uncompromising. He turned, expecting to see another sycophant or social climber. Instead, he found himself staring at a woman who looked like she'd been carved from flint and righteous fury. Mid-20s maybe. Faded jeans that had seen better years. A coat 3 sizes too big, probably borrowed or bought secondhand. But her eyes, Christ, her eyes could have melted steel. "That's my bag," she said, not asked. Jason's mouth curved into the practiced smile that had closed 1,000 deals. "I believe you're mistaken, miss." "No." She stepped forward, and he caught a whiff of something unexpected, vanilla and determination. "You're mistaken. There's a blue ribbon tied to the handle." His gaze dropped. There it was. A simple strip of fabric, frayed at the edges like everything else about her. Amateur hour. He'd already unzipped the case halfway, revealing a child's clothes folded with military precision. "Look, I'm in a hurry." "You're in a hurry?" Her voice pitched higher, drawing stares from a dozen strangers. "So am I, and that's my son's winter clothes you're pawing through like you own the world." The words hit him like a slap. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. A small boy materialized beside her, all wide eyes and untamed hair. He couldn't have been older than 5, but he watched Jason with the kind of wariness that spoke of hard-learned lessons. For the first time in 15 years, Jason Hargrove found himself at a loss for words. Around them, the airport held its breath. His assistant shifted nervously. Security cameras recorded everything. This wasn't how kings were supposed to be dethroned, not by a woman in second-hand clothes who didn't even know his name. "Fine." He pushed the suitcase toward her, harder than necessary. "Take it." She lifted it easily, never breaking eye contact. "Thank you." As she walked away, the boy turned back and stuck out his tongue. Jason stood there long after they disappeared into the crowd, feeling like he'd just lost a war he didn't know he was fighting. Natalie Prescott wasn't afraid of rich men or their reputations. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, not anymore. 3 years ago, she'd learned that family could be the cruelest enemy of all. Her stepmother Elise and stepsister Corinne had orchestrated her destruction with surgical precision, turning her father against her with lies wrapped in just enough truth to sting. The night before her wedding to Henry Vale, her childhood sweetheart, her future, her everything, Corinne had slipped something into her champagne. She'd woken up in a hotel room she didn't recognize, half-dressed and photographed, with no memory of how she'd gotten there. The stranger in the bed beside her had been gone by morning, leaving only shame and the smell of expensive cologne. Her father called her a disgrace. Henry broke their engagement. Corinne married him 6 months later, wearing the dress Natalie had chosen. She never knew the stranger's name, never saw his face clearly. But sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, she remembered the weight of him, the way her body had responded despite everything, and the sickening certainty that she'd been nothing more than a transaction. The Beckett Children's Fund Gala was the kind of event where rich people went to feel better about being rich. All champagne bubbles and hollow applause, designer gowns worth more than most people's annual salaries. Natalie worked the floor in borrowed heels that pinched her feet, serving canapés to people who wouldn't meet her eyes. She slipped into the service corridor with an empty tray and nearly collided with a donor who had been drinking more than the music could disguise. "You should smile more, sweetheart." His hand shot out, fingers closing around her wrist with practiced ease. Makes the tips better. She jerked back, but his grip tightened. Let go. Come on, don't be unfriendly. Jason had stepped into the corridor moments earlier to take a call, the noise of the ballroom too much for business. He hung up when he heard Natalie's voice, firm but pressed. Let her go. The voice was cold as January rain. Natalie looked up to Jason standing in the doorway, his presence filling the narrow corridor like storm clouds. The drunk donor puffed up, all bluster and wounded entitlement. This is none of your. Jason stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice or make threats. He didn't need to. Something in his posture, in the way he held himself, made weaker men remember their place. The donor's hand fell away. He mumbled something about misunderstandings and melted back into the crowd. Natalie rubbed her wrist, hating that she was grateful. You again. He shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to be both careless and careful. Small city. Too small, she muttered, pushing past him. But as she walked away, she felt his eyes on her back, and something cold settled in her stomach. This was no coincidence. Saturday at Brookhaven Galleria. Natalie clutched the navy coat she couldn't quite afford, knowing her son needed it more than she needed heat this winter. The price tag felt like judgment, but his old jacket had more holes than fabric. Still pretending you can provide for that mistake you call a child? The voice stopped her cold. Natalie turned to find Corinne, standing 10 feet away, perfectly coiffed and smiling like a shark. Give me the coat, Natalie said quietly. Corinne's manicured fingers closed around the sleeve. Only if you start doing what's good for the family. Father has a proposal for you. A real man this time, not some charity case who got you pregnant and ran. The words were designed to cut, and they found their mark. But Natalie had learned to swallow pain like medicine, bitter but necessary. The coat, Corinne. Mary Leonard Cray. Merge the shipping lines. Give your bastard a real father and a real name, and maybe... That's not your color. Both women turned. Jason stood beside the electronics display, looking at Corinne like she was something he might scrape off his shoe. Jason, escorted by his head of security, was in the electronics store comparing headphones when a sharp voice from across the concourse made him pause. Corinne's smile faltered. Do you know who? Yes. His gaze shifted to the store manager, who was already reaching for his phone. And I know security will be happy to walk you out. The threat was quiet, polite, and absolutely lethal. Corinne's face went white beneath her foundation. She shoved the coat at Natalie and stalked toward the exit. Natalie adjusted her grip on the coat, suspicious gratitude warring with growing unease. Why do you keep crossing my path? Are you stalking me? Jason, who definitely wasn't just some random traveler, smiled without warmth. Still figuring that out. The call came on a Thursday that tasted like rain and bad decisions. Jason was reviewing quarterly reports when his head of security knocked. Marcus never knocked unless someone was bleeding or about to be. There's been an incident with Natalie Prescott. The name hit him like a physical blow. What kind of incident? The kind that happens when powerful men don't get what they want. Turns out, her father had arranged for her to marry another man, a shipping magnate named Leonard Cray, 30 years her senior. It was all business to merge the Prescott-Cray shipping lines. Natalie refused. Someone had slashed Natalie's tires. She was being followed. Her son's school had called about a strange man lingering at the playground. Jason didn't believe in coincidences, especially not ones that involved the woman who'd been haunting his thoughts. That evening, he stood outside her apartment building, rain turning his $1,000 suit into a soggy mess. He could have sent an intermediary. Should have. But something about her demanded directness. She opened the door looking exhausted and wary, her son peeking around her legs like a baby bird. "You need protection," he said without preamble. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity." He paused, choosing his words like ammunition. "Marry me." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of rain on windows and a child's cartoon playing in the background. "You're out of your mind," she said finally. "Your family will back off. No one touches a Hargrove's wife. Your son stays safe." And what do you get out of it? The question he'd been dreading. Because the truth was complicated and probably wouldn't sound sane to anyone, including himself. "A clean conscience," he said, which was both true and completely inadequate. She barked out a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Get out." "Think about it," he said as she started to close the door. "If not for yourself, then for him." The door slammed in his face, but not before he saw the fear in her eyes. Jason's Bentley crawled through afternoon traffic near Lincoln Elementary. His driver had taken a detour to avoid construction on Main Street, a random choice that felt increasingly less random by the second. Through tinted windows, Jason spotted a commotion on the sidewalk. A man in a black coat stood too close to a woman and child, his posture screaming barely contained violence. Natalie stood between the stranger and her son, her body coiled like a spring. Even from a distance, Jason could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself ready to run or fight. "Stop the car." He was out before the engine died, crossing wet pavement with predatory grace. The man looked up at his approach, and Jason read the calculation in his eyes, the momentary weighing of profit against self-preservation. "Is there a problem?" Jason's voice carried the kind of authority that came from owning half the city. The stranger's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "We're fine here." "No," Natalie said quietly, not taking her eyes off the threat. "We're done here." She took her son's hand and walked away without looking back. The man hesitated, clearly torn between completing his assignment and avoiding whatever consequences came with crossing a Hargrove. Self-preservation won. Jason watched them go, noting the protective way she curved her body around her child, the careful scan of potential escape routes. This woman had learned to survive in a world designed to devour her. That night, she stared at her sleeping son and thought about devil's bargains and lesser evils. The business card Jason had given her felt like both salvation and damnation. By morning, desperation had won. Few hours later, she arrived at Hargrove Tower. Jason was surprised to see her. She can't forgive herself if anything happens to her son, so she had to accept the offer. "This is an arrangement," she said. "No promises. No pretending." "Understood," he said. They wed at the courthouse on a Tuesday that smelled like bureaucracy and broken dreams. No flowers. No vows beyond what the clerk required. No pretense that this was anything more than a business transaction. Natalie moved into his penthouse with 2 suitcases and a lifetime of suspicion. Jason doubled security around her son and pretended this was normal. They lived like polite strangers under the same roof. Separate bedrooms. Separate lives. Separate meals most of the time. But ice has a way of cracking under pressure. One Sunday morning, her son wandered into Jason's home office and climbed onto his lap without invitation. Small arms wrapped around his neck, the trust absolute and terrifying. "Daddy," the boy said like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jason's chest tightened. He looked up to find Natalie in the doorway, her face a mask of protective fury. "Don't call him that," she whispered, pulling her son aside. "You can't go around calling people dad." But Jason found he didn't mind. For the first time in his life, the word felt like it might fit. Sunday dinner at the Hargrove estate was a weekly tradition steeped in obligation and old money. This week it included unexpected guests. Evelyn Hargrove watched her new grandson chase the family's ancient golden retriever across manicured lawns, his laughter echoing off marble and hedgerows worth more than most countries' GDP. "Jason," she said quietly, "do you see it?" "See what?" "The way he looks at you. The way you look at him." She paused, studying her son's face. "That's not acting. Mother, it's impossible." But even as he said it, Jason was counting freckles and cataloging expressions, memorizing the sound of joy from someone who'd learned it was safe to be happy. That night the wind changed. A door in his memory scraped open. A missing evening. The Westbridge Hotel. A business dinner that had turned into something uglier. Too much whiskey and too little conscience. Cole arranging for a companion to help him forget whatever deal had gone sour. A woman's hair dark and soft. A face he couldn't hold on to. Shame threaded the recollection. He had never cared for the version of himself who needed erasing. Cole had been thorough in his cleanup, but some messes left stains. It came to a head at the Prescott estate. Natalie's father had summoned her under the pretense of reconciliation. Jason insisted on going with her. They walked into the drawing room. Natalie's father, stepmother, and stepsister waiting. Henry Vale also was there, the man who'd once been hers. Thomas Prescott sat behind his mahogany desk like a king pronouncing sentence. Elise flanked him, perfectly coiffed and venomous. Corinne perched on the arm of her husband's chair. Henry, who'd once promised to love Natalie forever. "Sign the annulment," Thomas said without preamble. "Mary Cray. Give your bastard a proper father." "Or what?" Natalie's voice was steady as steel. "Or lose him entirely. I have lawyers, judges, connections. You're an unwed mother with a history of poor choices. How hard do you think it would be to prove you're unfit?" Jason stepped forward, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You'll lose everything before she loses him." Thomas sneered, but there was something fragile in his bravado. "You think you can threaten me, boy?" "I don't threaten," Jason said quietly. "I own. Half your properties are mortgaged through Hargrove Financial. Your shipping contracts depend on my ports. Your daughter's trust fund? Invested in my companies." The silence that followed was deafening. "One phone call," Jason continued, "and you're a rich man's ghost story. Touch my wife or my son again and you'll learn what poverty feels like." For the first time in her life, Natalie saw her father at a loss for words. In the penthouse elevator, his phone buzzed. "Cole, we found partial footage." Under it, a second message, "And the recovery team says the original deletion request came from me." Jason stared at his reflection in the mirrored wall. Memories of that night at the Westbridge crept back. Too much whiskey, too much noise, and Cole working to keep his name out of the papers. At the time, Jason brushed it off, barely thinking about it. He assumed everything was fine, that no harm had been done. Looking back now, he knew those were just lies he'd told himself to sleep at night. "Send it," he texted. The security footage was grainy, time-stamped 1:42 a.m. from 3 years ago. Jason watched himself lean against the elevator wall, clearly intoxicated. Beside him stood a young woman clutching her coat like armor, her face turned just enough to be recognizable. "Natalie, you watched it once, twice, a dozen times until the images burned themselves into his conscience." The truth was worse than he'd imagined. Not just a nameless encounter, but a violation of someone who'd trusted him to be better than he was. When he showed her the footage, she sank into her chair like a woman who'd been carrying the weight of the world. "I tried to tell my father the truth," she said quietly. "That I'd been drugged, that I didn't remember, that it wasn't my choice. He called me a liar. I'm sorry." The words felt microscopic against the enormity of what she'd endured. "I didn't know, and that doesn't fix anything, but you showed up anyway," she interrupted. For us. Even not knowing. I'm going to keep showing up. Not because I'm trying to erase the past, but because he's my son and you're. He stopped, afraid of presuming too much. The sound of small feet thundered down the hallway. The boy burst into the room, face bright with innocent joy. Daddy? Grandma says we can get pancakes with sprinkles. Natalie opened her mouth to correct him, then stopped. For the first time in 3 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rewrite their story. Yes, she said, voice catching. We can. They went to Maple in Maine, ordered too much food, and learned what it felt like to be a family. Not a perfect one, but real. Honest. Built on truth instead of convenience. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos. But inside a booth sticky with syrup and sweet with possibility, 3 people discovered that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose. And sometimes, choosing love is the bravest thing you can do. If you enjoy this story, like and hit the subscribe button, also share with your friends. It encourages us to bring you more stories like this.